This evening on the Rock Newman Show, the District of Columbia has come a long way from the 1990s when D.C. was named murder capital of the United States with 479 homicides. Tonight, we talk with Peter Newsham, the city's current chief of police, about his vision for the force, engagement with the black community, controversial issues like stop and frisk, and more. That's coming up right now on the Rock Newman Show. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, right here in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. The Metropolitan Police Department's Peter Newsham joined the force in 1989 and quickly rose through the ranks following promotions by two of his predecessors, Chief Charles Ramsey and Chief Kathy Lanier. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser named him chief of the Metropolitan Police Department in 2017, at a time the city was inundated with issues directly related to gentrification and growing concerns about police brutality and citizens' rights. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today, Chief.
Rock, thanks for having me on.
Good to see you.
I appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to tell folks something that maybe no one else has ever told them, because I was at a summer cookout with you down at Bernard Demchek's house, and you ate up all the collard greens. You and Phil Mendelsohn.
Yeah, when he wasn't reaching on my plate.
Again, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Part of what I like to do here, especially when we have figures who are leaders in the community, whether it be someone on, I did Jim Vance, you know, and part of what I always want my viewing audience to understand is not just what you do, but who you are. And so to that end, I'd really like to kind of start with a bit of a biography in terms of, you know, where you grew up. Where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in a town in Massachusetts called Weymouth, Massachusetts, which is on the south shore of Massachusetts. Ended up going to school, ended up going to undergraduate at a
I'll tell you what, before you get there, because we really want to know, man.
So you want to get into the younger age.
So mom and dad in the house?
Big family. Mom and dad were in the house. I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers. Dad worked. Mom worked much harder as a mother, raising 8 children. And she's a miraculous woman. And now she has over 30 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren.
How special is that?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And the incredible thing about my mom is that, you know, Christmas comes around, and she can get a gift for everybody in the family and get the exact size, which is, I don't know how the heck she does it.
Unbelievable, huh?
Yeah.
And as an early, you know, in your early years, what were your fantasies? What were your dreams? What did you want to be when you were a little boy?
You know, I didn't always envision myself being a police officer. I had always kind of told my mom I was going to go to law school, which is interesting because I finally did, but I became a police officer first. I almost did that because I had always told my mom that, and I wanted to, you know, do what I had told my mom that I was going to do. But the way I ended up getting into policing actually is I got my undergraduate degree in political science. Where do all good political science majors go? They go to Washington, D.C., right?
Right.
Politics,
right?
Right. So I ended up in Washington, D.C. I'd done an internship here actually in college. And the thing about Washington, D.C. is when you're not from Washington, D.C., the thing that struck me when I first came here is what a really beautiful city Washington, D.C. is. It just struck me as being a really beautiful city. I get down here, I'm looking for jobs up on Capitol Hill. They paid about, I want to say about $13,000 a year. The police department paid $25,000 or so during the police department.
Okay. So let me ask you something. So, again, we talked about, early childhood, mom, dad. Who were your early significant influences?
Yeah, so my dad was a big influence for me. He actually started in his job as a bricklayer, and then he worked his way up. He didn't get his degree until much later in life. And when he left, he worked for the power company. Okay. When he left, he actually left as one of the vice presidents of New England Light and Power. He had actually built a couple of power plants because he ended up being an electrical engineer. Yeah. And so that was very influential to me as a child to see, because he started out as a blue-collar guy, and to see a guy do that through his life, it made me always think that I could follow in his shoes and do the same. Yeah.
Now, you have a family of 8.
I do.
5 brothers and
5 sisters and 2 brothers.
So family of 8. Where do you fall in the chain?
I'm in the middle. So I'm the middle boy, and I'm the 5th child. So they say that I don't know what they say about middle children, but I was definitely in the middle.
Now, were you on a patrol in elementary school?
Funny you should ask that. I did end up being, in my elementary school, I ended up being, did you know that? Did somebody tell you that?
Absolutely not. Really? Absolutely not, no.
I ended up being like the crossing guard, and you got to wear like a little lieutenant's badge as the crossing guard, and I was so proud of that. So maybe that's what inspired me.
Let me tell you a very self-serving reason that I asked that question. Is because it gave me an opportunity to be able to say that I was a patrol, and in my elementary school, I was the first person as a 5th grader that ever became captain of the patrol.
Oh, nice, nice.
So I've worn a badge in my career also. So you get to school, you do your undergrad political science, you come here looking for a job on Capitol Hill. You join the police force 1989.
89, yep.
Which was some tough times.
Tough times, and it was. I made the decision to join, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and I tell people all the time it was the best decision I made in my life. I loved the job from the very first day. I mean, I went into a class with 59 other young people from this region, from other parts of the country. You develop incredible bonds during that training that you do in policing, and then went out into the community. I started in the 6th District, which is in our Ward 7. When I got promoted to sergeant, I went to the 7th District, which is our Ward 8. When I got promoted to lieutenant, I went to the 5th District, which is Ward 5. And then when I got promoted to captain, I went back to the 6th District, so back over into Ward 7. So I spent the majority of my early career in Wards 5, 6, and 7. And during the 90s, it was a tremendously violent time in our city. Yes. And there were people that really needed the police to come and to help in those situations. And I tell people this story all the time, is that Chief Ramsey, came in as the chief in '99. I was a captain at the time, not very long. I had just been promoted to captain, maybe about a year. One morning, after I had been in 5, 6, and 7D my whole career, one morning, actually it was in the evening, I got a page. We had those little pagers at the time. Sure. He said, be in the chief's office at 8 o'clock the next morning. So as a young captain, I figured it's one of two things. Either I'm in really big trouble or something good's going to happen.
What have I done now? Right.
So I go in, and the chief's there, and the executive assistant chief, a guy by the name of Mike Fitzgerald, were in the office, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? He says, Pete, I'm going to make you the commander of the 2nd District. Wow. Which is up in Ward 3.
Yeah.
And I was
Idaho?
Idaho Avenue.
Idaho Avenue.
I'm very excited, Chief. Thank you so much. A young captain. I'm going to do the best for you. And I was like, where is it? Yeah. Because that was not a part of the city I had ever.
You had gone to those into that area.
I had never policed in that part of the city. So the thing that I learned from that experience is that although policing is different in Ward 3 than it is in a lot of other parts of the city, particularly at that time in DC's history, the people were just as passionate about their police service.
Yeah.
You know, they wanted the police to be responsive to their concerns.
What year was that? You know?
I went there in 2000.
Oh, 2000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you came on in '89. In 1992, D.C. There were several years D.C. was the murder capital.
It was. Yep.
And I remember we put together. Someone had given out some Adidas shoes or Nike shoes or something like that for turning guns in. There had been several. This, I think, was the third or fourth year in a row D.C. was the murder capital. And we put together a little campaign, which was funds for guns. And we ended up doing it over at, in Ward 8 there at Willie Wilson's church, Union Temple Baptist Church. And we went out and thought, you know, in our wildest dreams, we said, man, we're going to give $100 for everybody that turns in a gun. And we really wanted that to be an example of some leadership and to say, you know, we want to see what we can do in our little small way to have an impact on the community. And so we figured in our wildest dreams that we might get 500 guns. And so obviously we did our calculations, said that's going to be $50,000. So we wake up that morning and it is a blizzard. It's below, it's maybe 20 degrees, snow coming down. Now we're freaking, oh man, you know, I mean, we're not gonna make much of an impact. We get to the church and there are people wrapped around. And by maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, that $50,000 was gone.
Yeah.
And long story short, my wife got in the car with two members from the SWAT team, because, you know, the force had
to take the guns.
Folks over there, you know, and they went back to the bank, got a whole bunch more money. We ended up getting about 3,000 guns off the street that day.
That's a lot.
You know, we've never been able to, never wanted to take credit, but the homicide went down dramatically in the weeks after that. I've always wondered if that had any impact, which leads me to just an issue that there's continues to be a raging debate about. Some of the guys were talking about before we came on the air here, and that is about DC laws and how it relates to and challenges the NRA, the gun control, the lobby group, and the rest, and what the chief's position is on what is sensible gun control.
Yeah, so you know, guns are driving, illegal guns are driving the violence in our city, and there's no question about that. So around 80% of the homicides that we have in our city are by illegal firearms. Illegal, you know, people say, well, what is an illegal firearm? And that's a firearm that's either purchased or possessed in opposition to the current statutes. So it doesn't matter really what state you're in. There's different degrees of what's illegal, but depending on what state you're in. Mm-hmm. I am very comfortable with the laws that we have in the District of Columbia. I truly believe that the laws we have in the District of Columbia has saved lives.
Can you share with us sort of what they are? I mean, you don't have to get way down in the weeds, but sort of the top line of what.
The current state of affairs in the District of Columbia is you can possess and register a firearm to have in your home. Mm-hmm. You have to go through a process. You can go to our website and it'll lay out all the details for that. And you can also get a carry permit in the District of Columbia.
Okay.
We only have about, in this city, I want to say about 8,000 carry permits. Uh-huh. And then we have, you know, many more registered guns that are in homes. So you can legally possess a firearm in the District of Columbia. It's the illegal guns that are causing the problem. Mm-hmm. So you asked me where I stand. I will say this. There is absolutely no need for assault weapons in any major city in our country. Mm-hmm. No need for them.
You in favor of a ban?
For assault weapons, 100% in favor of a ban. Mm-hmm. Assault weapons were designed to kill human beings in a warfare situation. Yeah. And the capacity of those weapons in a large city, which is so dense with people, they're just too dangerous to have. If you want to have an assault weapon, you shouldn't have it in a major city. So I'm 100% in favor of a ban. And you see that any of the mass shootings that we have had in our country are almost exclusively involved these assault weapons.
Yeah.
And so, you see what happens. You have young children losing their lives, kids going to college, people at synagogues, and it's just, in my mind, I cannot think of a good reason to have assault weapons. With regards to, in the District of Columbia having very strict rules about carrying a firearm, I think that's important, and that's important for the district in particular because we have so many dignitaries that are in our city and come to our city. To have strict rules about having a firearm, I'm in favor of that as well. Do you think that sufficiently answers what you're asking?
I think it's I really think it's the top line. So there's often the argument, staying with the guns for a moment, that D.C. has some of the most restrictive laws in the country. Yet the rate of violence perpetrated by those with guns still remains very high.
Yeah.
How do you fix that?
I think that used to be an argument that somebody could make in the district when we were the murder capital, but our violent crime in our city has reduced drastically. And if you look at the last 10 years, reported violent crime in our city has really dropped dramatically. We had a really bad year last year. We had 160 homicides in our city, which is way too many for 67 square miles. So I'm not so sure that that is a valid argument, that the restrictive gun laws haven't made a difference, because I firmly believe that we need to make sure that we don't allow firearms to get in the hands of the wrong people. You have people out here who have mental health issues. You have people who have the intent to use a weapon illegally. Felons, for example, who want to pick up a firearm. The police department, it's very beneficial to us to be able to make sure that those firearms are removed from those circumstances.
So with the violence having subsided, the trajectory has been down, as you said last year. Yeah. You had more homicides. What is your fundamental approach and basic philosophy about policing?
So it took me 30 years of my life, and I've accumulated this information over those 30 years in policing to learn one fact about policing that's critically important. It's really having legitimacy and trust with the community that you serve. And that is a very difficult thing to achieve in policing. It's something that requires a constant daily effort by every single person on the police department. And one of the things that we're challenged with right now in policing is you could have one police officer who's a bad actor. Yeah. Their behavior is going to be displayed to everybody. So all the work that you've been doing to build bridges, to develop relationships, to be transparent and be legitimate can be destroyed by the actions of one or two people. And so that's, if you talk about frustrating and challenging in this work, that can be very painful. That strikes you at your heart.
We have a video from your predecessor, Kathy Lanier, just speaking to that point. Let's take a look.
Well, I think it really is the community just needs to feel like the department, the police department, and I mean individuals in the police department, not just the department as a whole, but individuals, they have to feel like that we really, truly, honestly are here to make life better for them, that we care. When somebody gets shot in a community, when somebody gets hurt in a community, if they feel like the police really don't care, they're not going to tell us anything. We have to show them that we care. And that's not that hard to do. Most cops that I talk to, and most cops I've known in my entire life, with very small exception, this is what they want to do. They live to help make people feel safer and be safer. They're not very good at articulating it, and we don't train them to go out there and make sure people understand that. So I'm trying to train them to understand that. That is important when you get on the scene of a crime, to not just do it, just the facts, ma'am, right? I'm so sorry this happened to you. You know, to be a little compassionate, show some empathy. There's more to policing than just the facts.
Yeah. So, to that end, with what Chief Lanier said, who's gone on to great things with the NFL, and what you said is to develop trust. You acknowledge that's one of the most difficult things to do.
It is.
So just yesterday, didn't know we'd be talking about this, but just yesterday, reporting, and I think coming out in the Washington Post yesterday and today, is the ACLU challenge to the department, to you and your officers, about the disparate rate of arrest of African Americans throughout the city for what they refer to as minor crimes, small offenses, smoking marijuana in public and that sort of thing. And that, you know, sometimes some of the issues, they were in the 80 percentile, something I think was 90+% African Americans arrested. With those rates of arrest, which indicate a bias, how do you change that? And how does that become less, what would appear to be less bias?
So that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. So, you know, you look at a report from the ACLU, and they use 2 data points. The 2 data points that they use is they use arrests for minor offenses, and they use race.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't consider any of the other really important data points that need to be considered.
Like what?
For example, socioeconomic status, deployment of police, where is our crime happening in the city? All of those things need to be considered. And the other thing I think that's critically important for folks to think about is that when we have seen, as an agency, disparate treatment with regards to arrests, we've tried to change behavior to impact that. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to draw some bright line rules from a report that is written purposefully, I think, to some degree, to espouse a certain point of view, with just 2 data points. Because what happens is when you're talking about minor offenses in our city, minor offenses affect people. You know what I mean? For example, publicly smoking marijuana, possession of open container alcohol, or drinking in public. I can't tell you how many people in our community, and it's folks from all over our city, that call the police and want the police to do something about that. I think that what we're doing as a city now is we're saying, well, maybe arresting isn't the best thing. One of the things that report didn't point out is that for those types of offenses that they were talking about, the Metropolitan Police Department has drastically reduced the number of arrests that they make for those category of cases. The other thing that the report didn't point out is, like, for example, for public consumption of marijuana, that we no longer do custodial arrests at MPD. What we do is we issue what is almost the same as a citation to folks.
And that was, and that switch came when? When did you stop making custodial?
That just happened about a year ago. So when we see, and you know, the whole marijuana thing is a recent evolution, because we made, you know, we decriminalized marijuana here in the district, I want to say in 14. And then when we saw the numbers on the police department for public consumption seemed to be having a disparate impact, we said, as an agency, we said, well, listen, we got to change what we're doing here. And we started to issue citations. And now that I see this report coming out from the ACLU, the no permit offenses are a little bit more difficult. I guess, you know, the city has to talk about whether an arrest is the proper circumstance. You certainly can't let somebody drive who doesn't have a driver's license, because that's a safety issue, and you know how many traffic deaths we've had in our city. When you're talking about possession of an open container of alcohol, if we see that that's having a disparate impact, maybe we need to think about going to a citation circumstance there too. And so I guess that the other side of the coin that a lot of people don't consider is the community who calls and says, you know, that group of guys, and it's generally young men, are out there and they're smoking marijuana, in an area where now I can't access the CVS. You know, an elderly woman will call in, I want the police to do something about this. And they see the police come up and they'll issue a citation and the police leave, and then maybe the activity continues and they're like, well, now the police haven't done what I've asked them to do. So it's not an easy issue, and it really, I think, one of the things that the report did point out, particularly when they were talking about the no permits, is some of this has to do with somebody's ability to have income. You know what I mean? So you can be in a circumstance where you're in a poor situation where you're unable to get a permit, but you need to drive because the one job that you have, you know what I mean, is driving distance away. So you know, it's a very, very complicated issue. I think that it's a little disingenuous by the ACLU to say that this is a police and a bias issue. I think that's a little unfair.
So that's the premise of their article.
It is, yes. And the other thing too is they say that they make some assumptions that the fact that there was a disproportionate number of arrests for no permit, for example, we use an example, that the police are disproportionately stopping African Americans in our city. And so, you know, I think that's unfair as well, without any data to support it.
Do you feel as if they're, in some of those, they're all devoid of bias?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I'd be naive to say that. I mean, come on, we live in the real world. There's certainly bias, and so I think in a leadership position on the police department, my goal is to try and make sure that we don't have bias in any of our interactions.
And in terms of training, how do you do that?
So you have, and that's one of the things you have to make your officers aware of, is that they do have biases, and every person has biases. It's called implicit bias. And so we provide our officers with implicit bias training so that they know that they have a bias, so they can try to avoid it when they're doing their police work. I don't know if you're familiar with our training that we have over at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We started that about 14 months ago.
Yeah, I mentioned the name earlier, Bernard Demchek. He's involved in that,
yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Demchek, Dr. Thompson from UDC teach the class. And this is another thing we have to teach about our officers about, and it helps with an understanding of the police and race relations, not only in our country, but in Washington, D.C. In the not too distant past, police officers were responsible for enforcing racist laws in our country. And so our community has lived through that. And so when they see the police, the first thing that they think of is this is a racist organization. And so what we're trying to teach our police through that program is that, you know, whenever you're dealing with anyone in our community, anywhere in our city, you have to overcome that. And the way you overcome that is the way you behave. And and this is our bottom line. It's really simple for policing in Washington, D.C., is that everybody you interact with under any circumstance, whether they have a mental health issue, whether they have a substance abuse issue, regardless of their circumstance in life, regardless of what they're doing, you treat them with respect. Really one word. If you treat them with respect, then you will get respect in return. And that's our challenge. That's my challenge as the chief of police. We have so many men and women in this organization, sworn and civilian, that are working towards that goal. We get so frustrated when somebody knocks us back by doing something stupid.
I mean, so one of your people?
One of our people. It doesn't even have to be a Metropolitan Police officer. We just saw yesterday in Texas a shooting that we're all very uncomfortable with.
Oh, man.
And people are going to attribute that to all police. We're watching a trial unfold up in New York City right now for Eric Garner. In that case, there's an internal New York City Police Department trial that's going on. And so that's going to impact us here in Washington, D.C. And so what I ask my folks to do is every single day, come in here, put on your uniform, treat people with respect. And I think eventually, and I tell you, I travel this city all the time. People really like their police department. They do. I mean, we all have issues with the police, and we could be better, and we're working towards that. people like their police officers here in Washington, D.C. I think we're doing a pretty good
the
job.
The training that you're talking about, it's, certainly not to patronize you at all, but that's invaluable. I noticed something when I first started doing the Rock Newman Show 6 years ago. Well, I started over in Southeast on Martin Luther King Avenue at WEAC Radio, but then I took the.
You were at WEAC.
Yeah, I was at WEAC. Yeah, that's where we got. That's where we launched. But we went to Busboys and Poets, and so I was there for several months on a Saturday, and I became very close to the owner, Andy Shalal. And one of the things that I learned from Andy, that I learned about Andy, that what he does, it doesn't matter if it's a manager, a bartender, someone that is sweeping the floor or whatever. But before they start working officially, they have racial sensitivity training. And Busboys and Poets arguably is considered to be one of the most diverse restaurant chains in the metropolitan region. And part of that he's had that success is because there is a sense of comfort for everyone to come in, because everyone is going to be treated the same. And so again, I give you an opportunity. I'm hoping that's your goal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's our goal every single day, and that's what we're working towards, is to make sure that people feel comfortable with their police.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Now,
like I said, regardless of their circumstance, if we have to, I tell my officers, if we have to take somebody into custody, and that's part of our job,
yeah.
It's only about 5% of what we do in policing is arrest folks, but when we do have to take somebody into custody, it needs to be done safely and it needs to be done respectfully.
Okay. Respect, capital R, that's a big word. We had council member Breon Nadeau here. She's council member Ward 1, which Howard University sits. She had some reaction to the stop and frisk controversy that came up. Let's take a look.
A lot of the policies we have in place in government, not just this government, but all governments, really have had a deep and lasting negative impact on our communities of color. And that is really what moved me to stand up on this. I work together with a number of groups, Stop Police Terror, the Ward 1 Near Act Study Group, and constituents who are involved with these organizations. And they've really shown me how I can use my leadership and my privilege to make a difference in these issues. So, and I'll tell you, this is another area where when you have an uptick in violence in Ward 1, which we do right now, this is a thing that some people who just don't get it will throw in my face.
Right.
I'm soft on crime,
Yeah.
or I don't get it. Now, what's been interesting to me is I feel like all the work I'm doing is sort of building on existing infrastructure, right? We're not cutting the police force, right? We're not doing that. We're enhancing it. But I'm asking, and my point in this op-ed was, look, the NEAR Act, the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act that the council passed years ago now, that we're trying to implement this public health approach to public safety, trauma-based care, intervention rather than prison, diversion programs, all of these things that haven't been in place. The big piece of the NEAR Act is the data collection. And without the data on stop and frisk, that we have not been getting all the data, then we can't make informed decisions as a council on how this is being implemented. So my thing was, if you're not going to give us the data, just stop. Just stop altogether, and give us the data, we can talk about it.
So talk to me. Are they getting the data? What is the Metropolitan Police Department's position on stop and frisk?
So I
Policy.
think, the people really need to understand that we have never had a stop and frisk policy similar to what they had up in New York. So, and the one up in New York received a lot of attention, and a lot of I think it's really in a lot of people's minds what happened in New York, because the courts got involved, and at the end of the day, New York City was directed to stop that type of behavior. And the way
because so many of the criticisms and the complaints were found to be legitimate.
Oh, absolutely. And so the way that the stop and frisk developed up in New York City was that they have what's called CompStat. And so they measure different things at the different precincts. All the commanders come in and they measure different things. And one of the things they began to measure was how many people were stopped. So the commanders took it on their own to stop more people. And so there was some indiscriminate, unconstitutional stops that were occurring in New York City. We've never had a policy or a program here like that in the District of Columbia. The overwhelming majority of the times that the Metropolitan Police Department makes stops in our community is based off of lookouts that we receive from the community after a crime has occurred. So if you were the victim of a crime, God forbid, and you saw the person who let's say they assaulted you and they ran away, you call the police and you give a description of that person to the police, and then we make a stop. If we make a stop in that circumstance, we're required to document that. So that's the documentation that the council member is talking about. The NEAR Act requires some more specific questions to be answered during the course of that stop, and not only that those questions be asked, but that they be documented. You know, so that it can be aggregated and people can look at that information. Which, from the very day that the NEAR Act was passed, it was something that we have no objection to. There's no problem with having that information, sharing that information. I think it's important information for people to have. One of the things that people who are NEAR Act advocates do not tell you is that the first year of the NEAR Act, it was not funded by the council.
Explain, what is the NEAR Act?
It's the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act, and it's a series of about 21 or so different things that the city is to do to make our city safer, essentially.
So it's a measuring stick.
It's a measuring stick. One of the things in the NEAR Act is data collection by the police department. It's one of many. The city has accomplished, I think, every other requirement of the NEAR Act since it has been passed. What we did in the fall of this past year is we actually changed our policy on the police department, so we were asking the questions that are required of the NEAR Act when we conduct stops, and we're capturing it on our body-worn camera, because it took us a period of time to get our computer systems to the place where we can gather this. If you think about it, to get this information, we have to change our IT systems. Like, I'll give you an example. If you're writing a ticket during a traffic stop, you actually write information down on the ticket, but the questions that needed to be asked in the NEAR Act were not encompassed on that ticket. So we have to change that form. We have to change the IT systems that collect that data, and then the IT systems need to be able to aggregate, which means to say, you know, out of these 50 stops, how many of these folks, you know, were stopped for this reason, or whatever the question may be, is the aggregation of the data. So we're in the process of changing our IT systems. It should be done this summer. It's been a pretty comprehensive undertaking for us, and there is some costs associated with that. But in the meantime, we wanted to make sure that we were collecting the data on our body-worn cameras so we could be in compliance with the requirements of the NEAR Act. So that's the state of affairs right now. The data collection piece should be accomplished before the end of this summer.
So you mentioned body cameras. So it seems as if it's universally accepted now that that has become a good thing. That is something that gives an opportunity to take away hearsay, he said, she said. We've got it on video. As a police chief of the nation's capital, where are you on that?
So with any piece of technology, you know, it's imperfect. You know, if you think about a camera that's, you know, here on your chest, and you move in a particular direction, it may not capture everything. We actually very thoughtfully did a study here at MPD about the effects of the body-worn camera on policing. We looked at 4 different categories, whether it had an impact on use of force, citizens' complaints, judicial outcomes, and one other thing that escapes my memory. But At the end of the study, and so the way it was a randomized control study, the way that we implemented it is when we rolled out the cameras, half the officers had cameras, half the officers didn't, and they compared the two groups to see if there was these impacts. At the end of the study, it showed that, at least in those 4 categories that we looked at, that there was no significant impact in officer behavior based on the camera. So it's important for folks to know that, at least in Washington, D.C., the cameras didn't impact officer behavior. The value in the camera, in my opinion, is that you do have a record when somebody wants to, somebody has a inappropriate or not a positive experience with the police. We have a record of that. We can go back and we can look at that. So the Office of Police Complaints, which is an independent agency in Washington, D.C., that investigates police complaints, they have access to all of our body-worn camera. So if somebody has a problem with the police, they can go to the Office of Police Complaints. They don't have to come to us. They can pull up the video and they can say, you're right, the cop did the wrong thing, and then they can send discipline over to us to make sure that the officer is appropriately disciplined. And I think as a, you know, for the community to have that, I think is extremely important.
For the community?
Yes.
To have that access to an independent agency?
An independent agency plus an independent record of behavior. So say, for example, you didn't have a body-worn camera.
Yeah.
Some police officer acts like a jerk when he has you on a traffic stop. He just treats you horrendously. Right. You make that complaint, but there's no record of it. Now you have that as a citizen. You can say, oh, well, now we got the body-worn camera. And on our side, on the police department side, if you have a police officer acting inappropriately, it's the same thing. We can say definitively they did that and hold them accountable for the behavior.
So something, whenever you get into the weeds of talking about policing, there is that, again, sort of that 4-letter word, blue code of silence. So right now we're talking about, you know, sort of the camera creates a sense of accountability. It would seem that there is value there. Now you say between the ones who would, between the ones who didn't, there wasn't anything you thought was discernible.
The study didn't show that, right?
Difference, right? Okay, but you know, how do you? I started off by talking about the blue code of silence. So, what has been your history with police officers? Say, okay, you got a bad police officer. How much and how often has a bad police officer been reported by a good police officer?
So we have a requirement actually in our general orders, I don't know if you know this or not, that if you witness a police officer who's involved in inappropriate conduct, that you have a requirement that you report it, and if you don't, you can be held accountable for their behavior by not reporting it. And I think that that's an important rule. 30 years of policing, I have seen, you know, a day at the Metropolitan Police Department where officers wouldn't report officers for bad behavior. In my opinion, that has changed dramatically. There's a lot of different reasons for that. It's not just the body-worn cameras. I truly believe, and it's really trying to change a culture, that we're trying to instill in our police officers that bad police officers make us all look bad, and we don't want them to be police officers. And you know, I'm a little bit restricted in talking about specific examples, but specific examples come to my mind where we have had police officers that were involved in bad behavior, where I talk to officers in the field, and they're like, "I'm so glad you fired that guy." You know what I mean? So that has changed dramatically in policing, at least here in Washington, D.C.
Please talk to us about the public, obviously part of your first responsibility is public safety. And so some of the new technology, the facial identification, drones and the rest. Talk to us, you know, about what MPD is doing to deploy those things in an effort to make the city overall safer.
So you know, the facial recognition piece, can be helpful if you're trying to identify a violent offender. One of the things that is been, in my opinion, the most important technological advance for policing in recent years has been the videos that we have out here. So the mayor has implemented a rebate program, so people can get a rebate if they buy a camera for their home, and you can get one of these Ring cameras.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many cases we've been able to close because of these Ring cameras. So I want to say so far they've given out like 10,000 cameras in the city. If we could give out 100,000 more, it would make my job a lot easier.
So the 10,000 cameras you're talking about are maybe up on the side of a building, on
They're
light pole?
They're on somebody's door, somebody's front door, or somebody's driveway. And a lot of times when they have them on their front door, they actually capture the sidewalk in front of the home.
Right.
And so I can't tell you, like I said, how many times, and these are cases, these are cases that are heartbreaking, where young people have lost their lives and where these cameras have been invaluable in us finding the person that's responsible.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the safety. We were talking about, well, let's just go here. Motorist versus pedestrian. And you got to, include bikers in there. Man, there is a lot of controversy about just those issues. So if you would share with us sort of your approach and what it is from a policy point of view, how you try to keep the motorists being able to get from point A to point B in a timely manner at the same time that pedestrians want to have their right of way and bikers want to have theirs.
So I think that we are in a city that is growing pretty dramatically. To the tune of about 100,000 in the last 10 years. We have more cars out on our streets. All the challenges in recent years that we've had with Metro. So more people are choosing to drive than take the Metro than they ever were. Hopefully that's going to change, and it looks like it's. I think it's going to flip back. I think
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think Metro's going to. It seems like they're moving in the right direction. I'm hopeful that's the case. And then you add to that mix all those vehicles that we have on city streets, and you add to that mix pedestrians, and you add bicyclists. And so the bicyclists are really they're critically important to reducing some of the car volume we have on our street, and then getting the two groups to kind of agree with what the safest way is to have this happen with nobody getting hurt. We have had traffic fatalities involving, and we've had some high-profile ones recently. The one at 16th and V Street, pedestrian lost his life. We had one in the 1200 block of Florida where somebody lost their life. And these are just, I want to say that was a bicyclist, an advocate here in the city that was known to anybody. He was kind of like a Rock Newman. Everybody knew the guy. But you see those kinds of things, and it's horribly tragic, but it really seems to have inspired a movement for change to make sure that our pedestrians and our cyclists are safe. Our role on the police department is for moving infractions, is to make sure that we're doing sufficient enforcement to try to change behavior. So we have our automated traffic enforcement program, and we've all probably gotten a ticket from the red light cameras and the speed cameras, but also having police officers out there, particularly addressing speed and distracted driving. I feel that's our responsibility as an agency, and we've done a really good job recently stepping up our game to make sure that there's more enforcement in those areas. The one little flip side to that is nobody likes getting a ticket. So when you're trying to improve your relationship with the community, writing tickets is not a good way to do that.
Right. One of the ways to improve the relationship with the community is, again, keeping them safe. Here's what I want to ask you. Can you share with our viewing audience sort of your role as chief of Metropolitan Police Department with so many other police departments, from Secret Service to Capitol Police to so many other police departments here in this one municipality? Is that a blessing and a headache for you? That's one thing. And once you answer that, I want to talk to you about some concerns that I hear from time to time. People coming down to see the Capitals play or the Nationals play or whatever, where people are in a lot of people are in a small place, and how do you prevent tragedy, major tragedy?
So it's two real difficult questions. The first one, and the reason I smiled because we just saw Kathy Lanier. When Kathy was the chief, the relationship really actually began to change with the federal agencies. Probably when she first became chief, we didn't have a great relationship with the federal agencies, and that has recently become much better. So in the last 10 years, that relationship has become very good. So I know the leadership at all of the federal agencies here in the city, and you hit the nail on the head. We have a bunch of cops that are up there on Capitol Hill. We have Park Police, you have the Metropolitan Police Department, you have Secret Service, DEA, FBI, and they all have uniform patrols.
Right.
But the relationship, at least at the leadership level, is really, really good. So just rest assured, and one of the reasons it has become better is, we do this inauguration thing every 4 years, and when we do that inauguration, we have to seamlessly put into place a pretty significant plan. And if you're going to go in there as enemies, you're never going to get anything accomplished. So I think over the years, all these police departments decided it's better to be friends than enemies, and the relationship has gotten better from there. With regarding handling the large events that we have in our city, and this goes to police staffing, if you think back to 2018, you want to talk about large events, we had the March for Our Lives early in the year, which was all the young kids that came down after the shooting in Florida. We had 5 championship hockey games, including a championship parade for our Washington Capitals. We had the Major League Baseball All-Star game here in Washington, D.C. We had the funeral for President George Bush. Those are huge events that draw huge numbers of people. And if you don't think you need a police department that can handle those events, in addition to making sure that our communities are safe, I think you might want to think twice about reducing the size of the police department.
I want to ask you, just on a very human level, that march where the kids were coming, tens of thousands, as the police chief charged with the responsibility of keeping everybody safe, man, are you getting butterflies? I mean, it's
there's two things. There's 2 times that there's a lot of times I don't sleep, but two times I can guarantee I won't sleep is when we have those large events here in the city. And there's you want to make sure that everybody comes here and they're safe. The other thing that you worry about as a chief of police is having any one of your police officers hurt or killed in the line of duty. As you know, this is Police Week this week. I'll tell you a little story. I talked about the town I grew up in, Massachusetts. A police officer was shot and killed in Weymouth, Massachusetts this past year, a guy by the name of Michael Chesna. His wife, his 2 children, and his parents came down to the candlelight vigil that we had the other night on the National Mall. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet them because they knew a close friend of mine from when I was a kid. And so we arranged to meet with them. When I met with her, I gave her a hug. She didn't let go. And what that really kind of struck home to me is the impact that the losing a life unnecessarily can have on a family. And I attribute it to our police officers who lost their lives in the line of duty, but I also attribute to the 160 people we lost in our city last year. Every one of those families, I'm sure if I was able to hug every one of them, would have given me the same exact hug. So you talk about stuff that inspires you to continue to do this job. That is one of them. To know that Michael Chesna was willing to put his life on the line to make sure that other people were safe is one of the things that inspires me to come in and worry about things like large events like you talked about, and not sleep sometimes, and from time to time get beat up. All of that is okay when you get a hug like that from a woman who lost her husband in the line of duty.
You know what? We have 90 seconds left. This hour went by very, very quickly. What give you an opportunity with that time left to speak to what do you see as has been the greatest success and joy of you taking over the reins of the DC's police department?
I've been asked that before, and really one of the things, and I'm going to go a lot further back than just being the chief. But one of the things I'm really, really proud about this police department, and it's been a team effort, is the way that we have changed. When I joined the police department, you know, at times it was embarrassing to come here. You know, we were very underfunded.
Yeah.
We had a really bad reputation for using excessive force. We had the dirty dozen, as you remember, that were getting arrested. So we had police officers that got getting arrested on a regular basis from some pretty serious offenses. Sometimes it was hard to come to work. But this department has transitioned in a very positive way. You have a really, really good police department here in Washington, D.C. It's been a team effort. I feel like I've played a role in changing this police department, and it's really to be able to look back on 30 years of work and feel like you did something that was worthwhile. I know we're not perfect, but our goal is to be perfect, and we've made a lot of steps in that direction.
Continued success.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for coming in. Folks, that wraps us for this evening. For more information on this program or any other program produced by WHUT, go to WHUT.org. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye, and may God bless you.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.